spirit, fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart.
I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you about stress and tension. One of the things that we know about stress and tension is that every one of us experiences it to some extent in our lives. We all have circumstances and situations that cause us tension, that create stressful events in our lives. There are all kinds of stresses that come into our being, and tension is really defined as two opposing forces that are pushing or pulling in opposite directions. So often in our lives, we feel that things happen and create a stressful situation, create tension, pull upon us in all ways and all directions, and we really don't know what to do about it. Some of us are people who are involved in performing. In my case, I give speeches often, and some people say that before they give a speech, before they have a performance, if they're a theatrical actor or actress, before they enter a sports arena and perform their particular sport, there's a tension or a stress that is really positive because it gets them ready, it gets them up for the experience. But that's not the kind of stress and tension that most of us want to get rid of. What we want to get rid of for the most part is that stress and tension that gnaws at our stomach, that makes us shake and shimmy inside. We have these times in our lives when we just feel like we can't deal with any more. Whether it's a job or a family situation, whether it's financial problems, whether it's our children or relationships, all of us are faced at different points in time with stress and tension. And for the most part, the tension and stress that we feel in our lives is not good. Physicians tell us so often that many of the physical ailments that we have come from the tension that we have in our lives: high blood pressure, ulcers, all of these diseases of the heart, many of them of the vascular system, come from the stress that we experience in our lives. We believe firmly that by changing the way that we think, we can change the quality of our life. It isn't enough, though, to simply change the way that we think. We have to internalize and go beyond simply changing the way that we think to changing the way that we know the reality of life, so that circumstances and situations have a less or different effect upon us. I'd like to share with you the cause of tension. There is a cause of tension that's true for all of the negative influences in your life and in my life. Cause of tension everywhere. And the great cause of tension in our lives is simply the fact that things are not the way we think they ought to be. We think things should be the way that we think they should be, not the way that they are. But the reality is that things are the way that they are. And if we choose to respond to the way that things are with stress and tension, then we have to accept the consequences, both physical, mental, and spiritual. I'll give you an example. If you're driving in your car down the street and you're in a very good mood, no problems, you feel good. You're driving on your way to some event that's not stressful, no great problem. And there, as you drive down the street, a car pulls in front of you, you slam on the brakes, and immediately your thought processes begin to move in a different direction, in a different process of thought. And that process begins to be one of stress and of tension, and the peace that you had when you were driving down the street now begins to change radically as you deal with the circumstances and situations. So you look at the driver who's pulled in front of you, he is stopped, he goes on his way. At that point in time, your thought process begins to build upon the negative impression that you've had from that one experience. And on it goes from that experience to the next. The reality is that if you look at that experience, you don't think that that car should have pulled out in front of you. The reality is the car pulled out in front of you. Another example, All of us have stressful situations at work or at home when we just feel like we can't stand to hear the telephone ring one more time. But it rings another time. And when it does, within our being, we build up a stress or a tension that just says, I just can't stand it. I can't take this anymore. The reality is that that telephone rang. Whoever it was on the other end placed the call. They had no idea how you felt or what you were thinking, but they did what they needed to do, and you responded. You responded to the circumstance and the situation, and to that response came a feeling of stress, a feeling of tension, and the tension comes from that very definition of two opposing forces, the way you think things should be and the way things are. And back and forth we go in life. All of us who've dealt with children can identify with this reality of people doing things that we don't think they should do. If a child misbehaves, if a child is late, if a child fails to do something that we feel they should do, it is the core of thinking in our own mind that says they should have done what we think they should have done, as opposed to what they really did. If we're going to deal with the cause of tension in our lives, the cause of stress in our lives, we need to first acknowledge and understand that stress is a reality. It's going to be here because these opposing forces are going to constantly be fighting. It is impossible for you and for me to know all of the people who are going to come in contact with us in a given day, or certainly within our lifetime. It's impossible for us to know what motivates them, what brings them to say the things they say, to do the things that they do. And we are called into this physical life to live with other people, with our families, with our coworkers, in the communities and neighborhoods where we reside. Because of that, there's going to be stress and there's going to be tension. And so the way that we propose to deal with this is by changing the way that you think and the way that I think about these circumstances and situations in life. If we change the way that we think, and if we stop thinking about the way things ought to be, and we accept the fact that this is the way things are, we can begin from that point to order our thought process and our lives in a new and different direction. You know, in the shopping centers and malls, there are escalators, and they're always side by side, one going up, the other one coming down. And often in our lives, we spend our time trying to go up the down escalator or down the up escalator. We're on this moving staircase of life, and it's going in a direction. And we seem to be fighting it, constantly fighting it, and running to try to get where we want to go. That tension, that stress. And if we're able to change the way that we think, if we're able to be aware of the fact that we live in our minds and not in the world, and by living in our minds and changing the way that we live in our minds, we can change the out-picturing of our daily life. We can step on the escalator and we can go up, or we can step on the other escalator and we can go down, and we can get where we need to go effortlessly. Not because there isn't difference, and not because there isn't difficulty, and not because there isn't challenge, but because we have stopped fighting the difficulty and the challenge and the opposition. And we've stopped it by ending our opposition to life. And we've begun to embrace the reality that things are the way they are. People are the way they are. Jobs are the way they are. Finances are the way they are. Now, what do I do? Where do I go? And from that point, the tension and the stress begin to melt away, and you are able to look at your own life choices. Your own decision-making process is changed and is operating from a center that is balanced and harmonious, that can guide and direct you in new ways. The only reason that you were upset is because you are upsettable. It isn't the other people, it isn't the circumstances, it isn't the situations, it isn't the events that are upsetting you. They just take place in your life. It is you that allow yourself to be upset. It is you that allow yourself to be stressed. It is you who consent to be in the midst of tension. And it is you who can change that process of mind and life and can come in to harmony and balance while dealing with stress and tension in a positive and creative way. Stress is something that is forceful and that pushes, but we can release that stress, and when we do, we can release that tension, and when we do, there is a relaxation and there is a positive outer experience. Jesus, the great way shower, the master teacher, brought to us the magnificent example of the perfect human life, the perfect spiritual being living in a physical life experience. If we look at his life from Calvary, or from Bethlehem to Calvary, and everything in between, if we look at the experiences of his life, he faced the same difficulties, the same challenges that all of us face, and more. He dealt with family problems from his earliest life. We read and know about conflicts within his family. He dealt with the reality that people didn't accept him. He was rejected. His friends turned against him. All manner of things happened to him. And yet in the midst of all of these circumstances and situations, he was able to transcend those physical experiences and to move away from saying, this is not the way it should be, this shouldn't be happening to me, moving away from the unhappiness of the experience into the perfect balance, the perfect order of each circumstance and situation of his life. And when we take him all the way from that early life in Bethlehem to the end of his physical life experience, in the crucifixion experience, we know that just immediately preceding that, during the days of his trial and his public humiliation, he lived in silence, accepting the reality of where he was, but knowing that in the midst of where he was, he would be guided and directed in the way that he should go. He had many reasons to say things ought not to be this way, but that's not what he said. And we are invited to take his example as the magnificent wayshower. We're invited to internalize the demonstration of his life experience in our own life experience. And if we do that, the stress and the tension can be released as we forget about the way things ought to be and we deal with the way things are. If you are sick, you are sick. If you are poor, you are poor. If you are confused, you are confused. If you hurt, you hurt. But those things do not have to have control over you. And in the midst of those experiences, it is the denial of the force and the power that they have over your life that diffuses the reality of their impact upon your physical life and on your inner life. Many people in our movement use affirmations and denials, and we certainly ascribe to that and we encourage it. But it isn't through denying reality that we're able to bring about great and good change in our lives. Reality is what it is. But when we are in the midst of physical reality, we can transcend those experiences by denying the power that they have over us. If we're faced with a physical condition, if we have cancer, we have cancer. That cancer need not touch us because we in our inner being can transcend that illness. If we have not enough money to pay our bills, we have lack in our lives. The reality is that at that moment, at that time, we have lack. That is a reality. But that lack does not have to overshadow the abundance that we know is ours. And if we attune ourselves with the reality of divine presence, forget about the way we think things ought to be, claim the fact of the way that they are, and begin to deal with it, then we're guided in prosperous and abundant ways. We are invited to give up the fight of life that says that we think it should be a certain way, and instead embrace the reality that life is the way that it is. Experiences and circumstances are exactly what they are. And now in the midst of these circumstances, what shall I do? And if we take that approach, if we open ourselves to the resourcefulness of the divine light of God, the divine direction of God, no matter how difficult the circumstance or situation, no matter how hurtful the pain of life is, the reality that will always visit upon us is the sure knowledge that the centering presence of God will guide and direct us out of these negative influences and experiences of life. It is through changing the way that we think. It is through giving up our ideas about life and how it should be and the embracing of life as it is that we can have a full and happy life, and we can become victorious overcomers of any circumstance and situation that presents itself in our lives. We believe that prayer and meditation are centering forces. We believe that prayer begins us in the process of calling ourselves into the presence of that which is divine. So we'd like to invite you to pause at this point and join with us in a prayer. Eternal God, we gather our hearts and minds together, aware of the stress and the tension that faces all of your children in this physical pilgrimage of life. And in the midst of the physical life that we live, and in the midst of all of the stresses and tensions, we claim your peace and your harmony, your love and your balance, and we claim that overcoming power of your reality in our life to be real and to bring to us the strength and the hope that we need. We know these things to be true in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That was a very exciting concept, Michael, that we can control our own lives and we don't have to be controlled by the circumstances of life.
Very important. And I think for New Thought truth students, it is a concept that needs to be revisited, because so often we hear people talking about manifesting this or manifesting that. And that if you're truly a spiritual person, if you're a good truth student, that difficulty doesn't come, that illness doesn't visit your house, and that relationships are always perfect. And that's simply not true. So.
We know that that's not true, because otherwise, why be here? Why be on earth? But there's the old saying, if you're served a lemon, make lemonade. So if we're served unpleasant circumstances, then work through that circumstance. Don't just ignore it. Don't just turn your back on it. Don't pretend it's not there, but work with it and through it. Mm-hmm. And that's how we gain spiritual growth. That's the only way we can grow.
Very important concept. I think people who come from traditional backgrounds, traditional Christians, very often will tend to take the things that don't go the way that they want them to go, and they'll write that off to being the will of God, mm-hmm. or the devil. Yes. In one case. And New Thought students so often will take the teaching that Christian Science brought to us, Mary Baker Eddy espoused so extensively in the non-reality of matter, and they'll promote that concept, which is to say that things that appear in the physical aren't really real and that we can transcend them. And I think both perspectives miss the point and don't really help the person, or don't really help the person who is truly hurting. And I think that's what we need to do, is offer hope for the person who is hurting. And we need to begin to do that by saying that, yes, you hurt, yes, whatever you're facing is real, but it doesn't need to touch you, and you can overcome it and you can deal with it.
Yes, and yes, that it's normal. It's a normal part of life, of the life process. And if we look at it that way, then we don't feel that we're being singled out, and that others think that so many people are in denial because they can't accept the fact that all is not perfect in their lives, which is what we've just been saying is such a fallacy at that. Someone asked, I have a question to ask you, about hypochondria. How does hypochondria deal with this very subject?
Hypochondriacs?
Yes, well, hypochondria.
Well, I think that the creative force of people who choose to be ill and choose to build upon their illness or choose to claim illness, mm-hmm. Creates within their life experience a reality. And certainly if they think they're sick, in reality, they are sick, even though they don't have that outer manifestation. So it's actually a reversal, yes. of the positive principles of life.
Yes, and the hypochondriac really enjoys poor health. I know my mother-in-law used to say she has a friend who enjoys poor health, and actually that lady did. She told about her aches and pains and how terrible they were, and that gave her great satisfaction to know that she had those problems. But in a sense, it's a cop-out. Totally, it's a cop-out, because then they don't have to face the burdens of life. They just nestle into their hypochondria.
So often, too, people who are in today's society and follow the very real medical model, and certainly medicine does a lot of good and wonderful things, but many people are conditioned to accept their sickness. And one of the things that you've heard me say so often is that it's always amazing to me when people recount their illness, yes. And someone has the flu and goes to the doctor, and they come with such great pride and say, well, Pastor, I saw the doctor, and he said I have the worst case of the flu that he's ever seen. as though it's a point of pride
Yes.
that they had the worst case of the flu. And then you go beyond that and you say, well, my goodness, if that doctor sees 40 patients a day and he's been practicing medicine for 20 years, you must be a very sick person if you're the sickest. But the reality is that that person probably does not have the worst case of the flu that the doctor has ever seen. The doctor may have said it or they may have thought it. But in any event, that's not a thought upon which we would want to build our consciousness. And so it's a process of mind and how our minds operate and work. And to move away from that and to get out of the physical experiences, and especially the illness mentality.
There's so much that we can do for ourselves, and one thing is the drugs. People can take drugs, but it's unfortunate in our country that we're so drug-oriented, that so many people use drugs as a cop-out. Now, I know that drugs are very often very necessary and life-saving, and they're very essential to our well-being. But I believe we do have too much of a drug mentality in this country, and I don't mean the street drugs, I mean prescription drugs, where whatever problem someone has, they think it's going to be cured with prescription drugs. And that debilitates the body. It changes the body chemistry. It changes the vibratory rate of the body. So therefore, the person isn't as apt to heal as if they just don't have the drugs in their body.
There is a tendency to fall into that desire to use medicines in the same way, but medicines are just like many of the other crutches that we use in life to avoid dealing with ultimate responsibility, to avoid dealing with ourselves on a personal level. We use drugs. Some people eat. Some people drink. Some people run away. In a spiritual sense, we use crutches. Many people in New Thought think that some of the trappings of traditional religion are maybe not as positive as they might be, but we fall into the same situation. We have people who would not have maybe great tolerance for someone who's praying the rosary, but they're willing to go and buy crystals.
Yes.
And someone may read the Bible, and someone else may feel that the Quran is the way. And so these things become the crutches that keep us from simply dealing on a personal level with the reality of God and ourselves.
But that's we need to be less judgmental in our society, I know. And we all need to be less judgmental, because when we're judging others harshly, then we're taking away their right in our own minds to do whatever they feel is best. And whatever makes the person feel better, then it's right. And I know that the various religions speak to people to the level of their own understanding, and their understanding for this specific lifetime. And sometimes I think we might come in with a blocked memory of certain things that we've known in other lives, just so we will learn the lessons in this life that we need to learn. And the main lesson is to flow with life and to not, like you were saying so eloquently, that we need to just accept what happens to us and go on from there, from that point. Instead of having it being a stumbling block, have it be a stepping stone, and be consciously aware of it and accept, yes, this is happening to me, but I can overcome it, I can do better, or I can go on to other things.
Or simply asking what?
Yes.
And be silent and wait.
Yes.
In the midst of the circumstance. But I think denying it is what gets us into so much trouble. And then also using crutches.
Yeah.
And the crutches are very useful in some cases. And all of
Essential.
those things. They help us. The pills help us in some cases. The rosary helps us. The crystals help. All of these things can help and do their own part. But we have to go beyond that and get ourselves centered in the reality that they are simply helping us to deal with the reality, which is that life is the way that it is.
And if they do indeed help us, then they are indeed right for us, for that individual, that specific individual. And you're, in discussing tension, talking about the cure for tension, I liked what you said about the going within, and the deep breathing is so important. And I think more people should be taught and should consciously practice deep breathing exercises. And so many people put that in the category of New Age hoopla, but it's not. Deep breathing simply relaxes your physical body so that the higher bodies can take over, so that we can live from that higher aspect of being. And to me, the deep breathing I've found to be most effective with people I've worked with has been inhaling deeply through the nostrils to the count of 8, hold it to the count of 4, exhale deeply with the lips slightly puckered to the count of 8, and then hold it to the count of 4. And if we do that 3 times consciously, then it just becomes a rhythmic breathing. And I know in helping people with past life therapy work, that works so well in getting them into that modality. If it does that, when we know for sure that it helps us overcome problems and accept, be adjusted to whatever circumstance life brings us.
Mhm. A technique like that is very helpful in the midst of a tense or stressful situation. And it moves us out of that stress and tension, and it moves us into ourselves. It attunes us to our physical being, which is exactly what you said, and it strengthens us to be able to be open and receptive to what it is we need to do.
Yes, and public speakers and vocalists have shown us that that's true, or any entertainers have shown us that that's true. They stand behind the curtains and do their deep breathing exercises, and they don't call it that necessarily, but they breathe deeply and fully, and by doing it to the count of any specific count, then it just regulates it so that it's more rhythmic. But singers and speakers, many speakers already have that rhythm established within themselves, so they don't have to do it by counting. But I like to remind everyone to consciously think of how do I relieve tension in myself, and to accept the fact that yes, tension is there. Tension is not necessarily bad. We can use that tension for the good.
And accepting it as a reality in our lives, but not letting it control us.
Yes, yeah. And that is so important, that we accept that whatever happens to us is not bad, it's not negative, but it just is.
Exactly. All of the things that happen to us in life simply are. And Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas in confident living, and we do this to share with you ideas that can change and empower and strengthen you as you deal with the challenges that you face in daily life. And we're pleased to be able to share these ideas with you, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Confident living, banner of might, comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart.